Let me tell you about Agent Vex of the Galactic Academic Integrity Bureau, because if there's one thing the universe needed, it was apparently a four-armed purple bureaucrat with an ego the size of a small moon and twice as dense. Vex had been personally responsible for catching 347 academic cheaters across 17 different star systems, and he made sure everyone knew it. His office walls were covered with certificates, commendations, and a particularly obnoxious holographic display that played his greatest hits reel on loop. Another flawless operation, Vex would say, polishing his badges with all four hands simultaneously while his subordinates pretended to be impressed. The integrity of academic competition across the galaxy rests on my shoulders, all four of them. Today was supposed to be his masterpiece. The Universal Mathematics Championship was being held on Station Omega 7, and rumor had it that someone was planning the biggest cheating scheme in galactic history. Previous championships had been plagued by scandals, involving everything from neural implants to quantum calculators hidden in digestive systems. The Galactic Academic Integrity Bureau was not going to let it happen again. That's where Truthseer came in. Truthseer wasn't just any mind-reader beast. Oh no. That would be too simple for someone of Vex's importance. This creature was the apex predator of telepathic detection, a six-legged, tentacle-faced horror that could sniff out deception from 3 solar systems away. It had been bred specifically for one purpose: to crawl inside people's minds and drag out every dirty little secret they'd ever had. Magnificent, isn't it? Vex said, gesturing toward the reinforced transport crate that housed his secret weapon. Strange purple light leaked from the air holes, and occasionally something inside would make a sound like a dying star. Truthseer has never failed to detect a cheater. Its success rate is 100%. Unlike my predecessor, who retired early after that unfortunate incident with the exploding thesis papers, the beast had cost more than some planets' entire educational budgets, but Vex considered it a worthwhile investment. After all, what was the point of having the most advanced civilization in the galaxy if you couldn't properly intimidate college students? Speaking of college students, that brings us to Jake Martinez. Jake was 22 years old, came from a little blue planet called Earth that most galactic citizens had never heard of, and had absolutely no business being at the Universal Mathematics Championship. Seriously, none whatsoever. His species had only discovered faster-than-light travel last Tuesday, metaphorically speaking, and here he was competing against beings whose civilizations had been solving mathematical theorems since before Earth's sun was even a twinkle in a nebula's eye. But there he was, sitting in the competitor waiting area, completely absorbed in what appeared to be a primitive paper notebook. While other contestants were meditating with crystal matrices or downloading equation databases directly into their neural networks, Jake was scribbling with an actual pencil. A pencil, as if he'd time-traveled here from the galactic dark ages. "How did that creature even qualify?" muttered Commander Zilch, a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose scales shimmered with built-in computational displays. "Its species hasn't even figured out quantum mathematics yet." "I heard it was some kind of clerical error," whispered Nyx, a blob-like entity that communicated through color changes. Currently, she was pulsing a particularly unpleasant shade of skeptical orange. Jake, blissfully unaware that he was the subject of intergalactic gossip, continued working through practice problems with the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for defusing bombs or trying to remember where you left your keys. He had that peculiar human habit of talking to himself while he worked. Okay, so if the hyperdimensional matrix rotates through 17 dimensions, and the coefficient is... Wait, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone rotate through 17 dimensions? That's just showing off. It was this exact moment when Agent Vex decided to bring Truthseer into the competition facility for its preliminary security sweep. After all, why wait for the competition to start when you could establish dominance early? "Prepare for awe," Vex announced to his team of technicians, as if he were unveiling a new monument to his own greatness, rather than simply opening a really expensive pet carrier. What happened next would have been hilarious if Vex had any sense of humor whatsoever, which he didn't, because apparently the universe has a twisted sense of irony. The moment Truthseer's crate was wheeled into the main corridor, the creature inside began making sounds that can only be described as what you'd get if you crossed a dying whale with a malfunctioning garbage disposal. The purple glow emanating from the air holes started flickering, like a disco ball having an existential crisis. "Is it supposed to do that?" asked Technician Mort, whose job it was to ask obvious questions so Vex could feel superior by answering them. "Of course not, you simpleton," Vex snapped. though privately he was beginning to wonder if maybe feeding Truthseer that expired mind squid last week had been a mistake. Truthseer is simply calibrating, yes, calibrating to the local psychic environment. But as they wheeled the crate closer to the competitor waiting area, the sounds got worse, much worse. It was like the creature was having some kind of telepathic panic attack, if such a thing were possible, which apparently it was. "Release the Truthseer," Vex commanded, because nothing says professional confidence like ignoring obvious warning signs. The moment the crate opened, Truthseer emerged in all its tentacle-faced glory. Picture, if you will, something that looks like an octopus had a very unfortunate encounter with a particularly aggressive houseplant, then got struck by lightning and decided to glow purple about it. Under normal circumstances, Truthseer was an impressive and terrifying sight that made even the most hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. Today was not normal circumstances. The beast took exactly 3 steps toward the waiting area, lifted what might generously be called its nose into the air, and promptly began backing away like it had just walked into a room full of angry tax collectors. Its tentacles were writhing in distress, and that purple glow was now pulsing in what could only be described as the universal sign for nope, nope, nope. "What is it detecting?" Vex demanded, pulling out his scanner and pointing it in every direction like a man trying to swat invisible flies. "Is someone using psychic dampeners, neural scramblers, illegal thought shields?" Meanwhile, Jake had noticed the commotion in the hallway and stuck his head out to see what was going on. The moment Truthseer caught sight of him, the creature let out a howl that shattered 3 windows and set off the fire alarm. "Oh hey," Jake said cheerfully, apparently immune to the sound of cosmic horror. "Cool, pet. What kind of dog is that?" If Truthseer could have fainted, it would have. Instead, it did the next best thing. It turned around and ran. A 6-legged telepathic nightmare, bred for courage and determination, was fleeing from a 22-year-old human who thought it was a dog. "Follow that beast!" Vex shouted, which was easier said than done, considering Truthseer had just scrambled up the wall and was now clinging to the ceiling like the universe's most expensive and psychically traumatized spider. "Should we tranquilize it?" asked Mort. "You will do no such thing," Vex roared. "Truthseer is operating perfectly. This is obviously a sign that we have found our target." He pointed dramatically at Jake, who was still standing in the doorway looking confused and slightly concerned about what he perceived to be a very upset alien pet. "Is it okay?" Jake asked. "It seems really scared. Maybe it needs water? My neighbor's cat used to hide under the bed when it was stressed." Commander Zilch, who had been watching this entire spectacle with the kind of fascination usually reserved for traffic accidents, began to chuckle. "The human thinks the Mindreader beast needs water," he told the other contestants. "Either he's completely innocent, or he's the greatest criminal mastermind in galactic history." "I'm putting 50 credits on criminal mastermind," said Nyx, her color shifting to excited yellow. "No one is that oblivious by accident." Vex, meanwhile, was having what could charitably be called a moment of professional crisis. In his entire career, Truthseer had never refused to approach a suspect. Never. The creature had once tracked a cheater through 17 dimensions and 3 different time streams. And now it was cowering on the ceiling because of one human who thought it was a really ugly dog. "There must be some kind of advanced anti-psychic technology at work here," Vex muttered, scanning Jake with every device in his considerable arsenal. "No one can simply make Truthseer react like this naturally. It's impossible." "Maybe the human is just really good at cheating," suggested Mort. "Obviously," Vex said, latching onto this theory like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver made of pure ego. "We're dealing with a master criminal here, someone so skilled at deception that Truthseer can't even bear to be in the same room." Jake, still completely oblivious to the fact that he had just been declared public enemy #1, went back to his studying. "I hope your pet feels better," he called over his shoulder. "Maybe try giving it some treats?" From the ceiling, Truthseer made a sound like a dying accordion and began slowly backing away toward the nearest exit. What followed was perhaps the most elaborate and expensive game of try to get the cat out from under the bed in galactic history. Except the cat was a telepathic horror worth more than most space stations, and the bed was anywhere Jake Martinez happened to be existing. Vex's first brilliant strategy was disguise. If Truthseer couldn't handle being near Jake directly, then obviously the solution was to sneak the creature close without it realizing what was happening. This led to the truly dignified sight of Agent Vex trying to dress a 6-legged psychic nightmare in a janitor's uniform. "Hold still," Vex commanded, wrestling with what appeared to be a very large jumpsuit. "This is a perfectly reasonable investigative technique." The Truthseer responded by immediately turning itself inside out, which was apparently something it could do, and was definitely something Vex wished he'd known about before attempting to put pants on it. Maybe try a different approach, suggested Mort, who was documenting this disaster for what he claimed were official records but was obviously his personal entertainment collection. Nonsense, Vex declared, pulling out a spray bottle. If disguise won't work, we'll use sedatives, just a mild relaxant to calm Truthseer's nerves. What Vex failed to consider was that tranquilizing a telepathic creature doesn't just make it sleepy, it makes it a sleepy telepathic creature that broadcasts its dreams to everyone within a 3-block radius. Soon, half the station was having vivid nightmares about being chased by giant mathematical equations with teeth. Sir, said Mort, after the third noise complaint from the neighboring sectors, perhaps we should try a different strategy. Fine, Vex snapped. We'll use positive reinforcement. This led to the surreal spectacle of the galaxy's most feared law enforcement agent attempting to lure a cosmic horror with treats. Not just any treats, mind you, but the most expensive telepathic delicacies money could buy. Crystallized thoughts from philosopher-poets, fermented emotions from award-winning artists, and something called Essence of Enlightenment that cost more per gram than antimatter. Here, Truthseer, Vex called sweetly, holding out a glowing cube of processed wisdom. Look what Daddy has for you. All you have to do is go near the human for just 5 minutes. 5 tiny minutes. Truthseer took one look at the treats, then at the corridor where Jake was studying, and promptly buried its head under its own tentacles like a really expensive, really traumatized ostrich. Meanwhile, Jake remained completely absorbed in his preparation, muttering things like, "Why would anyone need to calculate the square root of infinity anyway? That's just math showing off," while the greatest telepathic detection system ever created cowered in terror 20 feet away. The other contestants had by now turned Vex's investigation into the primary entertainment of the pre-competition period. Commander Zilch had started taking bets not just on whether Jake was a criminal mastermind, but on how many different methods Vex would try before admitting defeat. "I've got 50 credits on him trying to build a robot duplicate of the beast," announced Nyx, who had shifted to an amused shade of purple that perfectly matched Truthseer's stress glow. "I say he tries to hire a different Mindreader," countered a crystalline being whose name was an unpronounceable mathematical equation. "His ego won't let him admit this one is defective." They weren't wrong. Vex's next move was to call in backup equipment. Not just any backup equipment, but the entire emergency response kit of the Galactic Academic Integrity Bureau. Soon, Station Omega-7's main corridor looked like a cosmic crime scene, complete with psychic dampener fields, neural activity monitors, and what appeared to be a device specifically designed to detect thinking too hard. "There has to be something," Vex muttered, waving scanners in Jake's general direction like a man trying to find a gas leak with a birthday candle. "No one is naturally this, whatever this is." The scanners showed absolutely nothing. Jake's brain activity was completely normal for his species. His emotional state registered as mildly concerned about homework. There were no hidden devices, no psychic shields, no advanced technology of any kind. Just a human being who was, by all measurable standards, utterly ordinary. "Maybe," suggested Mort carefully, "the human really is just normal? And maybe Truthseer is having some kind of medical issue?" The look Vex gave Mort could have frozen helium. Medical issue? Medical issue? Truthseer is the pinnacle of telepathic evolution. It doesn't have medical issues. It gives other creatures medical issues. As if to prove this point, Truthseer chose that exact moment to attempt escape by phasing through the wall, which it couldn't actually do, resulting in the universe's most expensive Mindreader giving itself a concussion against solid titanium. "See?" Vex said triumphantly, apparently interpreting his creature's head injury as proof of its excellence. "Truthseer is so disturbed by whatever that human is hiding that it's willing to damage itself to get away. This just proves how dangerous our suspect really is." Jake, who had finally noticed that there was some kind of major security operation happening in the hallway, poked his head out again. "Hey, is everything okay out here? Do you need help with your pet? I'm pretty good with animals. I had a hamster in college." The moment Jake appeared, every piece of detection equipment Vex had set up began screaming alarms simultaneously. Not because they had detected anything wrong with Jake, but because Truthseer's renewed panic was broadcasting psychic static so powerful it was interfering with their sensors. "There!" Vex shouted over the cacophony of malfunctioning technology. "You see? The moment he appears, everything goes haywire. He must be using some kind of advanced counter-surveillance technique. Or, said Commander Zilch, who was beginning to suspect this was the greatest comedy show in galactic history, your beast is just really, really bad at its job. Vex spun around, all four arms gesturing wildly. Truthseer has never been wrong, never. Which means that human is the most dangerous academic criminal we've ever encountered. Jake, still trying to be helpful, took a step toward the chaos. Are you sure it doesn't just need some quiet time? Sometimes when animals are overstimulated. He never got to finish that sentence, because Truthseer took one look at him approaching and launched itself bodily through the nearest window, apparently deciding that the vacuum of space was preferable to whatever horror Jake's mind contained. Now look what you've done, Vex screamed at Jake, who was staring in shock at the Truthseer-shaped hole in the station's viewport. You've made it flee into space! I'm really sorry, Jake said, genuinely distressed. I was just trying to help. Is it going to be okay out there? From somewhere in the corridor, the sound of betting chips changing hands could be heard as Commander Zilch announced. And that's 50 credits to whoever had defenestration in the pool. The Universal Mathematics Championship proceeded as scheduled, partly because the show must go on, and partly because no one wanted to explain to the Galactic Education Council why they'd canceled the biggest academic event of the century, because a telepathic beast had jumped out a window to avoid a human who thought it was a dog. Vex, meanwhile, had positioned himself in the observation booth with enough monitoring equipment to spy on a small war. If he couldn't get Truthseer near Jake directly, he'd observe from a distance and catch this master criminal in the act through good old-fashioned surveillance. The fact that Truthseer was currently floating in space, curled up in a fetal position and refusing to answer telepathic calls, was merely a temporary setback. Competition begins in 30 seconds, announced the facility's AI in that annoyingly cheerful voice that all competition AIs seem to have. Contestants, please prepare for the first challenge, hyperdimensional calculus in 17 variables. Jake sat at his assigned station, looking like someone who had accidentally wandered into rocket surgery when he'd signed up for finger painting. Around him, the other contestants were preparing their minds for mathematical combat. Commander Zilch was interfacing directly with his neurocomputational matrix. Nyx had shifted to a deep blue color that indicated intense concentration. The crystalline being was literally humming with harmonic mathematical frequencies. Jake picked up his pencil. Let the competition begin. What happened next would be studied in academic circles for centuries, though not for the reasons anyone expected. The first problem appeared on everyone's screens. Calculate the optimal trajectory through a 17-dimensional folding space where each dimension rotates at a different temporal frequency, accounting for quantum uncertainty and gravitational lensing effects. Most contestants immediately began the logical approach. Establish baseline parameters, create computational frameworks, account for known variables, then build toward the solution through systematic mathematical progression. Jake stared at the problem for exactly 12 seconds, then wrote down an answer. That's impossible, muttered Commander Zilch, whose neural matrix was still processing the problem's initial parameters. No one can solve hyperdimensional calculus that quickly. But Jake wasn't done. He was now drawing what appeared to be a small diagram in the margin of his paper. Not a mathematical diagram. It looked like a stick figure riding a bicycle through what might generously be called a tunnel. Is he doodling? Asked Nyx, her color shifting to confused orange. Focus on your own work, commanded the proctor, though she too was staring at Jake's paper with the fascination of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. From the observation booth, Vex was frantically trying to analyze Jake's solution. Run it through the verification protocols, he ordered Mort. There's no way that answer is correct. 30 seconds later, Mort looked up with the expression of someone who had just discovered that gravity was optional. Sir, it's right. It's completely right. And according to the computational analysis, his solution is actually more elegant than the standard approach. That's impossible, Vex declared. Run it again. Meanwhile, Jake had moved on to the second problem. Determine the probability matrices for quantum entanglement across parallel dimensional streams with variable temporal flow rates. Most contestants were still working on problem 1. Jake looked at problem 2, tilted his head like a confused puppy, and muttered something that the microphones barely picked up. Well, that's just stupid. Why would you want to do that? It's like trying to juggle while riding a unicycle through a tornado. Just don't. Then he wrote down another answer. From 3 buildings away, a sound could be heard that was definitely Truthseer, howling. Apparently, even from the vacuum of space, the creature could sense that Jake was doing something that shouldn't be mathematically possible. How was he doing this? Demanded Commander Zilch, whose computational matrix was smoking from overuse. Is he using some kind of advanced intuitive mathematics, quantum consciousness algorithms, parallel processing through alternate timeline selves? I think, said the crystalline being, whose harmonics were wavering with uncertainty, he's just guessing. This was, in fact, exactly what Jake was doing. But they weren't random guesses. They were human guesses, which operated on principles that no alien mathematician had ever encountered. Gut feelings, pattern recognition based on, that looks about right, and the revolutionary concept of what would happen if I just ignored the complicated parts and did something simple instead. Problem 3 appeared. Calculate the infinite series convergence for recursive dimensional folding with temporal paradox compensation. Jake stared at it for a moment, then wrote in the margin, "This seems like it's trying too hard. What if you don't fold the dimensions? What if you just left them alone?" His answer was not only correct, it was so elegant that it reduced a 7-page standard solution to 3 lines. "That's not how mathematics works," shouted Commander Zilch, who was now openly staring at Jake instead of working on his own problems. "You can't just ignore half the variables because they seem too complicated." "But apparently you can," observed Nix, who had given up pretending to work and was now openly watching Jake solve problems using what could only be described as advanced mathematical laziness. In the observation booth, Vex was having what mental health professionals across the galaxy would recognize as a complete breakdown. "He's cheating somehow," he muttered, scanning Jake with every device at his disposal. "He has to be cheating. No one is naturally this good at mathematics while being this bad at mathematics." "Sir," said Mort carefully, "what if he's not cheating? What if humans just think differently?" "Impossible," Vex declared. "Mathematics is universal. Logic is universal. There's only one right way to solve these problems, and that's the proper way, the systematic way, the way that makes sense." On the screen, Jake had just solved problem number 7 by drawing another stick figure, this one appearing to shrug at a mathematical equation. His solution was, once again, completely correct and utterly inexplicable. From space, Truthseer's howling was now audible even through the station's hull. It was Professor Quill who finally put everyone out of their misery, though not until Jake had solved 12 more problems, using methods that included drawing smiley faces, writing, "This is dumb" next to a quantum mechanics equation, and at one point simply circling the entire problem and writing, "Nope," before somehow producing the correct answer anyway. Professor Quill was old even by galactic standards, a wispy creature who looked like someone had crossed a very intellectual spider with a retirement home librarian. She had been observing the competition from the academic review panel, growing more and more amused as the day progressed. "Agent Vex," she said, appearing in the observation booth with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to maximize dramatic impact. "I believe I can explain what's happening here." "Finally," Vex exclaimed, spinning around so fast that his forearms created a small whirlwind. "Professor, you have to help me. That human is using some kind of advanced cheating technology that's not only undetectable, but it's actually making him better at mathematics while simultaneously traumatizing my Truthseer." Professor Quill blinked her compound eyes slowly, the way very old, very patient teachers do when they're about to explain something that should have been obvious. "Agent Vex, when was the last time you studied human psychology?" "I don't study psychology, I study criminal behavior," Vex said dismissively, "which in this case are clearly the same thing." Said Professor Quill, settling into a chair with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver a lecture that would be remembered for decades. "Tell me, Agent Vex, how do most sapient species think?" "Logically," Vex said immediately. "Systematically, they process information in orderly sequences, building from known facts to logical conclusions. They follow established patterns and use proven methodologies. It's what separates civilization from chaos." "Exactly," Professor Quill agreed. "And what does that make their thoughts like? From a telepathic perspective?" Vex considered this. "Well, organized, I suppose, predictable, easy to read because they follow logical progressions." "Like a well-written book," Professor Quill nodded. "Clear chapters, organized thoughts, everything in its proper place. Very easy for a creature like Truthseer to navigate and understand." Down in the competition area, Jake was now working on a problem involving temporal paradoxes. His approach appeared to be drawing a clock, with a confused expression on its face. "Now," Professor Quill continued, "let me ask you something else. What do you know about human evolution?" They're from a death world, Vex said impatiently. Terrible place. Constantly trying to kill everything on it, so what? So everything, Professor Quill said with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had just walked into the perfect setup. Agent Vex, humans evolved in an environment where thinking predictably got you eaten. Their survival depended not on logical analysis but on rapid, intuitive decisions. Jump first, analyze later. Trust your gut, because your gut might be the difference between dinner and being dinner. She gestured toward Jake, who had now moved on to solving a problem about infinite dimensional matrices by drawing what appeared to be a maze with an arrow pointing to the exit labeled shortcut. Human thoughts aren't organized like a book, Agent Vex. They're organized like a three-dimensional explosion happening inside a tornado during an earthquake. They leap from topic to topic, make connections that seem random but somehow work, and arrive at conclusions through processes that would make a quantum physicist weep. But that's chaos, Vex said weakly. Exactly. Professor Quill clapped her hands together with delight. From Truthseer's perspective, trying to read a human mind is like trying to read a book where every page is written in a different language. The chapters are in random order, and half the text is replaced with emotional doodles and grocery lists. It's not that Jake is hiding his thoughts. It's that his thoughts are naturally occurring psychic white noise. Down below, Jake had just solved another problem. His method this time involved writing, "What if we just asked the equation nicely" in the margin, followed by an answer that was not only correct, but represented a completely new approach to the mathematical concept. "You're telling me," Vex said slowly, "that this human isn't a criminal mastermind using advanced anti-telepathic technology. He's just naturally confusing?" "Oh, it's worse than that," Professor Quill said cheerfully. "Humans don't just think chaotically. They think chaotically, and it works. Their entire species has survived and thrived using intellectual processes that shouldn't function according to any known model of rational thought. From a telepathic creature's perspective, they're not just white noise. They're white noise that somehow solves problems better than proper logic does." She pointed to the scoreboard, where Jake was now in second place, despite having spent the last hour drawing stick figures and writing commentary like, "This equation seems lonely, maybe it needs a friend." Truthseer isn't detecting deception, Professor Quill explained. It's detecting something far more terrifying to a logical mind, a thought process that works perfectly while making no sense whatsoever. Jake's brain is like a radio playing 12 different songs at once, and somehow they all harmonize into a symphony that solves hyperdimensional mathematics. From outside the station, Truthseer's howling reached a new pitch of existential distress. "The poor creature," Professor Quill said sympathetically. "Imagine being a master reader of organized thoughts and suddenly encountering a mind that operates on principles like, 'This feels right, and what would happen if I just tried the opposite?' It's having the telepathic equivalent of a migraine crossed with an anxiety attack." Beck stared at the monitoring equipment that had spent all day failing to detect Jake's non-existent cheating devices. "So, you're saying that humans are naturally, psychically toxic?" "I prefer psychically challenging," Professor Quill corrected. "Though I suppose from Truthseer's current perspective, there might not be much difference." On the competition floor, Jake had just moved into first place by solving the final problem using a method that appeared to involve drawing a happy face next to the equation and writing, "You've got this, buddy," before somehow deriving a solution that made 3 professors faint from sheer mathematical beauty. "The truly remarkable thing," Professor Quill continued, "is that he has absolutely no idea he's doing anything unusual. To him, this is just how thinking works." The moment Jake Martinez solved the final problem by drawing a stick figure giving a thumbs up to a hyperdimensional equation and somehow producing a solution that revolutionized 3 separate fields of mathematics, the competition officially ended. Jake had won the Universal Mathematics Championship using methods that would require 17 new academic papers just to explain why they shouldn't have worked. "I should have knew." "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient geometries," announced the facility AI, "we have a winner, Jake Martinez of Earth, with a perfect score achieved through..." There was a pause as the AI apparently tried to process Jake's methodology. "Through what our analysis department is calling weaponized intuition and mathematical empathy." Jake stood up, looked around at the other contestants who were staring at him like he'd just performed actual magic, and said the words that would be quoted in academic circles for the next 1,000 years. "Cool. So where's the cafeteria? I'm starving, and all this math made me really want a sandwich." That was the moment Agent Vex completely snapped. "Sandwich!" Vex screamed, all four arms flailing like a malfunctioning windmill. "You just revolutionized galactic mathematics using techniques that shouldn't exist, traumatized the most advanced telepathic creature in known space, and rendered my entire career meaningless. And you want a sandwich?" "Yeah," Jake said, looking genuinely puzzled by Vex's distress. "I mean, it's lunchtime, right? And I did a lot of thinking today. Thinking makes me hungry." From somewhere in the depths of space, Truthseer's howling took on a new quality. It was no longer the sound of psychic distress. It was the sound of a creature having a complete philosophical breakdown. The beast had spent its entire existence reading the thoughts of logical beings, and now it had encountered a mind that solved problems by asking equations how they were feeling. "Sir," said Mort carefully, "maybe we should retrieve Truthseer before it has a complete nervous breakdown." "Retrieve it?" Vex laughed, though it was the kind of laugh that suggested someone was hanging on to sanity by their fingernails. "How do you retrieve a telepathic creature that's currently having an existential crisis in the vacuum of space because it encountered a human who thinks math problems need emotional support?" Meanwhile, Commander Zilch was shaking Jake's hand with the enthusiasm of someone who had just witnessed the impossible. "You have to teach me how you do that," he said. "I've been studying hyperdimensional mathematics for 3 centuries, and you just solved problems by making friends with the equations." "Oh, that's easy," Jake said cheerfully. "I just figured the equations were probably just as confused as I was, so maybe if I was nice to them, they'd help me out. It's like when you're trying to fix something and you talk to it nicely, instead of getting frustrated." Nix, who had turned a brilliant shade of amazed purple, was frantically taking notes. "He anthropomorphizes mathematical concepts as a problem-solving technique," she muttered. "He treats abstract mathematics like a social interaction. This shouldn't work. This violates everything we know about logic and reason. But it works better than anything we've ever seen." "Is anyone else concerned," asked the crystalline being, "that we've just discovered that the most advanced mathematical techniques in the galaxy can be improved by being polite to numbers?" Professor Quill was practically glowing with academic excitement. "This is the greatest discovery in cognitive science since we learned that the Zentharians could taste colors. We need to study this immediately. Jake, my dear boy, would you be willing to participate in some research?" "Sure," Jake said. "But can we do it after lunch? I really wasn't kidding about being hungry." At that exact moment, Station Omega-7's emergency systems activated, as Truthseer finally gave up trying to understand human consciousness and simply fainted in space, requiring a full rescue operation to retrieve an unconscious telepathic nightmare from orbit. "Well," said Professor Quill, watching through the viewport as 3 rescue ships attempted to collect the floating, traumatized creature, "I think we can officially classify humans as a psychically hazardous species. Not maliciously hazardous, you understand. Just hazardous. In the way that a perfectly innocent natural disaster is hazardous." Agent Vex was now sitting on the floor, staring at his equipment with the hollow expression of a man whose entire worldview had been destroyed by stick-figure mathematics. 40 years, he mumbled. 40 years of detecting cheaters with logical, systematic methods. And I get defeated by someone who solves problems by being nice to them." "If it helps," Jake offered. "You seem like you're really good at your job. I bet you catch lots of actual cheaters." "Thank you," Vex said automatically, then paused. "Wait, why does that make me feel better? You just completely invalidated my life's work." "I mean, not really," Jake said thoughtfully. "I just solved some math problems. That's different from catching cheaters, right? Plus, your big purple friend seemed really smart. I bet once it calms down, it'll be great at its job again." From the rescue ship's communication channel came the voice of the retrieval team. Station control? The creature is awake, but it keeps asking us to promise that the human is really, truly gone before it'll come back inside. Also, it wants us to check the station for residual thought particles, whatever those are." "Residual thought particles," Professor Quill repeated with delight. "Oh, this keeps getting better. Jake, I don't suppose you'd be willing to let us study your brain patterns?" "Sure," Jake said agreeably. "But seriously, where's the cafeteria? I'm starting to get hangry, and I feel like that might make things worse for everyone." As the rescue operation continued, and the academic community prepared for the greatest paradigm shift in the history of telepathic studies, Jake Martinez wandered off to find lunch, completely unaware that he had just single-handedly redefined the galaxy's understanding of consciousness, mathematics, and the fundamental nature of intelligent thought. Behind him, Agent Vex was filling out what would become the most famous incident report in Galactic Academic Integrity Bureau history. Subject: Jake Martinez. Species: human. Threat level: existential, but probably not on purpose. Recommendation: classify entire species as psychically hazardous but well-meaning. Also, recommend hazard pay for any future telepathic operations involving humans. And therapy. Lots of therapy. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, Truthseer dreamed fitful dreams of mathematical equations that asked about your day and wanted to know if you were feeling okay.